Hello, this is Dr. Gary Castleberry, Program Director for Communication, Media, and Ethics here at Mid-America Christian University, and I am here with our COM 4413 Communication and Cultural Change Week 2 video lecture. Video lecture series is what we commonly refer to as an asynchronous dialogue. An asynchronous dialogue meaning we draw questions from our students from the readings to incorporate a kind of dialogic interaction that gives us the simulation of engagement and exchange, and helps us keep the readings and ideas of our texts and this course centered in front of us. So we are looking at week 2 questions coming from our students in the course, or a good portion of the students, and we will be looking at readings from several books. There's going to be a lot of bouncing around today, and that's totally fine. This is essentially a course readings bounce house, if you will. So we're jumping all over the place. It's like a 5-week birthday party. So in week 2, we are tackling contents with relating to television journalism history. This speaks to the chapter we're looking at from Jason Mattel's Television in American Culture, but primarily a ton of emphasis derives from a second Mattel text, and that is Complex TV, the Poetics of Contemporary Television Storytelling. And this is where we get at the heart of a burgeoning TV method that the author-scholar proposes for us, something perhaps we will apply in our TV studies project that we are working on this spring. But in order to apply it, we have to understand it. We have to define it. We must unpack this method. And so the readings we draw from in subsequent weeks, but starting off with this week, help us move in that direction. And then, of course, we have some tertiary readings from a couple of other texts that we will incorporate as well, including Seven Wall and Sights, TV the Book, a well-written compilation of reviews, some informed, subjective yet highly informed takes on top TV shows in the history of the medium, and then occasionally we get some excerpts from Ethan Thompson and Mattel's co-edited anthology, Sporting Works, shorter works from a number of authors, How to Watch TV. So, you never know what reading we will get in a given week, but we do know we're going to have student questions that help stimulate the direction of our video lectures. So let's jump in with some questions. I'll start with Destiny's questions and kind of work through what I can here. Some of these may take more time with, as usual, as perhaps we've come to expect, and then other times the question we'll give it a quickened response, just based on all kinds of circumstances, right? And so looking first at our Mattel text, Television in American Culture, Destiny asks, in your opinion, do you think news anchors should be able to do a newscast if they are biased toward a topic? Oh, so the questions of bias come up specifically in and around page 139, but really the context of that chapter gets at press journalism, broadcast journalism on television. And in terms of bias, here's an important reminder ultimately, and we are all guilty of kind of getting up on a pedestal, especially with our social media rhythms and routines, but we like to kind of get up to the point down there and say, hey, this is a problem, right? They are being biased or too subjective and what have you. The first thing we always want to remind ourselves is everyone has bias. Everyone has bias. You can be biased in one way, just as much as I can, and so too are our TV journalists. As is one of our theories we talk about in media culture, social influence, and perhaps even digital media literacy discuss, we have what you call agenda setting theory, right? Where in some instances there might be a clear agenda being set up with and by and for the media in certain kinds of favors. But we're going to limit that to just tackling this to say everyone has bias, but not everyone practices sound journalistic integrity. And I think that's where perhaps we can draw a better line, is to not only maybe practice ourselves in the way the choices we make about media consumption, or maybe consumption of news, but also look at what are their likely decision-making processes, and how are news outlets or organizations or channels constructing approaches to journalism. And I think as we learn how to close read texts, and TV texts in particular, it becomes clearer our ability to make those types of accurate judgment calls. All right, so good food for thought there. An opening question: do you believe that having television has helped political candidates that are running campaigns and so on, or has this television coverage hurt them? Both, right? We see instances of both sides of this all the time. We see you can gain a lot from that exposure, but you can also shine a light on quite a bit too, and things can be exploited, and that can sway public opinion, right? So we're dealing with institutions of persuasion, mass social persuasion, and we're also dealing with institutions of power, right? Not only in the mass communicator, but in the focus, in the topic, in the person or candidate that a light is being shined on. Okay, so what are some big differences in elections from when we didn't have television versus now? I think there's kind of a quick comparison contrast we can make to expedite a response here, and that would be, prior to television, you had posters and newspapers, and then of course radio later on, and these were, just as we might get swept up in not only television news but also internet news streaming constantly in slower times, right? When information moved slower, people were just as swept up by previous mediums that performed at a high level. Print in particular, so newspapers, radio was a dominant medium for a time, and even pamphlets, right? Another form of print. We can trace that back and look at those root origins and those influences. And versus, now it's not just television. It is there's something specific to the 24-hour news channel cycle and how they must constantly develop and promote content, as well as the internet, where the internet is, and we're talking about it like it's this singular entity. The internet is just a term we are labeling, right? A competing medium with television. But internet producers, I guess we should say, are often in competition with, and sometimes in conjunction with, news organizations. So, and this is a very American way of thinking about things, there is this sense of urgency, a race to be first, right? And if we just pause and let that sink in, this idea of, oh, we must be first, you need to be the first to learn this, I need to be the first to share it on social media, I want to be the first to like it, I want to be the first viewer, or I want to watch something live. All of these things are kind of tied up in, and I'm gonna give us some cultural studies terminology here, tied up in our dominant ideology, right? It's part of the American value system, ingrained it somewhere. Think about the Olympics. They're coming up. the Winter Games, and how consumed we get with, well, who has the most gold medals, right? Who is in first place? Who came in first the most times, the most frequent events. So this is something intricately linked with our cultural value system. Let's shift to talking about complex TV. Great questions about Mattel's work here. A question about a singular text of interest. Early on, the book opens with Mattel making an example out of the surge of audience interest in the spy genre, in the spy drama on television in the months, not so much years, although it lingered into years, or grew into years, but in the immediate months following 9/11. And so Mattel's making a point that the three shows that he talks about, 24 that ran on Fox, ABC's Alias, and CBS's The Agency, were each texts that were in development already. Okay, so the pilots would have been shot, they would have been picked up for a season of programming before the events of 9/11. But there was something about the conflation of events happening, the combination of text with the zeitgeist or spirit of the age, right? A sort of mass audience need for a particular kind of storytelling form that allowed the spy genre to catch an extra gust of wind in its sail. And so Mattel talks about these three texts as being exemplars of a new serialized type of drama, gaining momentum in American culture and on television in particular. And interestingly enough, The Agency was a text that only lasted one season or a little over a season, was canceled in the second season, something to that effect, while Alias lasted a full 5 seasons, and 24 aired for the better part of a decade and has even had 2 attempts at a revival. So, plus some made-for-TV movies that kind of bridged a little bit of time in there. But anyway, Destiny asks, if The Agency was the highest rated of the 3, and ratings matter and audiences matter, why would it have been canceled? This is a great question. And I feel like I can offer a sound industry-focused explanation here. At the time, right? So at the time The Agency would have come out, CBS was the dominant network. If we trace back and look at Nielsen ratings, okay, so Nielsen ratings that identify the most popular and most frequently viewed shows on TV, this is the Nielsen ratings determine the ad rates that the networks can charge advertisers. And so the ad rates help generate the profit, the revenue for all parties, really, but specifically the broadcasters. And so television has always been a ratings war. And at that time, although Fox, as we've read in a couple of places in our book, Fox had the #1 show for a great many years with American Idol, CBS had an absolute monopoly on viewership throughout the 2000s, and really it's closer and closer, and the demographics are really split up now, but CBS had a lockhold in the 2000s on the average audiences, and at the time they had so many shows, mostly CSI and CSI spinoffs, that were just huge hits, and they were pulling in, millions and millions of viewers a week, 20 million to 25 million to 30 million viewers a week for these, all of their mystery shows. But The Agency was, by those standards, pulling in a much smaller audience, and so to them they saw it as a weak link, whereas the other struggling networks saw Alias and 24 as something to build on, which they did. And then they became more culturally competitive and competitive in key demographics, which is important to the economics. So that explains that question, and we'll be right back to wrap up some of Destiny's questions and transition on. Thanks.